What is groupthink, and how does society compel our consent to conformity? We catch up today with Professor Karl Scheibe, a preeminent social and clinical psychologist, to discuss, among many things, the phenomena of groupthink, the evolution of social consciousness, and the arbitrary nature of essential things. Tune in.
My name is Karl Scheibe. I'm a psychologist. I've been at Wesleyan since 1963, which is 61 years ago.
Wow.
I came here from the University of California at Berkeley, where I received my PhD in psychology. And I've been teaching at Wesleyan ever since, except for a couple of sabbatical years, which I spent in Brazil, mostly, although I've been in other places as well. And I'm a social psychologist with a special interest in psychology and theater. I've written 8 books about psychology and most recently on theater as well. I'm also a clinical psychologist, licensed, and have a modest private practice. I have always loved my teaching, but I've been retired from teaching since 2008, but I continue to have an office here at the Weiss Center for Retired Faculty, which I helped found and put in place back about almost 20 years ago. So as a psychologist, I'm primarily a social psychologist, but I also do clinical work. But as I say, I have a strong interest in psychology and theater as well. And you mentioned the topic of the arbitrary becomes essential, which is a topic that I developed in connection with my work. There's a book called The Drama of Everyday Life, and that concept is discussed at length in that book. But I also made a little video about that topic, and if you'd like to receive it, I can send you a copy without a problem.
What is the distinction between social psychology? Is that different from the traditional psychology that a person, I guess, would recognize as going to a therapist?
The clinical psychology, no, yeah, clinical and social are two completely different fields. Clinical psychologists deal with human problems, as to say people who are depressed or anxious or bereft or lonely or upset or suffering of one form or another. Social psychologists are interested in the more general question of how living in society influences our thought, behavior, and action. The idea is that we're not human beings really until we're part of society. Um, and society is a variable and usually powerful thing. And social psychologists study the influence of individuals upon society and society upon the individuals. The groups you belong to, the families, the identities you have, the professions, and so on. All those are social things, and all of them have strong psychological significance. So traditionally, social psychology includes such topics as attitudes, political behavior, um, social experiences, family, and so on.
So how does social media and this new type of connectedness that has really, I guess, not necessarily existed in humanity before, how does that affect?
It has huge effects because consequences of all of our, we're not really human beings until we learn a language and are part of society. And now most of our contacts have been over the ages with other human beings speaking language and having physical contact with people and so on. But now the contact is more remote. So, when you're talking about social media and so on, you're talking usually about pictures being presented rather than the whole person. And there's a great difference between talking to a person as opposed to talking to a picture. So it's a different form of communication. Obviously, it's not entirely different, but it's substantially different from the way we've been brought up to live throughout the ages. So anyway, it's a huge topic.
This notion that exists these days, at least in the not non-academic zeitgeist of groupthink and people sort of acting based on pressures, right,
Right,
from certain enclaves
right.
that they're in. What are some of the factors that drive that? And is that something that is inherently good, bad? Is it being exploited?
I wouldn't make a judgment of value ahead of time, but I look at the consequences and see what happens as a result of it. When you mentioned groupthink, one of the most powerful examples of groupthink, that concept became very popular a number of years ago with the Challenger crash of a spaceship, right?
Yeah.
And they began to look at the construction problems of the spaceship, discovered that O-rings weren't properly installed and so on. And that was a decision made around a table somewhere, and people agreed to build the spacecraft as it was built, but with defective O-rings in it. And because people tend to take their opinions from authoritative others around the table and get the project moving along, and sometimes they make mistakes because they think the group has an enormous influence and power over what you say, whether you vote yay or nay on something. So it turns out that that was a huge mistake that was made by a group of people, all of whom succumbed to the phenomenon known as groupthink, and it's thinking like everybody around the table is thinking, so to get the project over. But it was enormously costly in terms of human lives. So, consulting other people and finding out what their judgments are about things is not necessarily the road to truth. So you have to be careful when you're following the opinions of other people, because you don't test out those opinions directly yourself.
Can you summarize, the what you mean when you say the arbitrary becomes the essential? How does that apply to, I guess, everyday life? What's the implication of having an understanding of that?
Well, how did you meet Liz?
A friend introduced us.
Yeah, well, you didn't know her all your life. She didn't know you all your life, right?
Yes, yeah.
You met accidentally, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, you met accidentally. You got to know each other, and you fell in love. You got married, and so on. That's something arbitrary that becomes something essential.
Okay.
You can't back out of that agreement and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. So I'll see you later," because that's a ratified agreement, right?
Yeah.
It's essential.
Yeah.
It's no longer something that's just happened in a moment. And that happens when you have a child. The assorting of the genetic material is accidental. There are 46 chromosomes, and you contribute half of the genomic material to your son or daughter, and your wife contributes the other half, and that whole thing is born. And once it's born, that assortment is made, and now it's essential. But it starts off as a throw of the dice. It's
Yes.
genetic dice, okay? And so we are composed by accident, but we become essences. You don't feel like you're an arbitrary person.
Yeah.
You're an essential person, right? You're
Yeah.
it. But if you were to think about it, you were conceived in a way that was largely accidental. We're all miracles in that sense. We're all extremely unlikely, okay, to occur. But once things get tracked and on in a particular pathway, then they become essential truths, okay? And often people mistake it, think just popular opinion doesn't mean that what you read in a textbook is correct. But nonetheless, if it's in a textbook, it becomes like an essential truth because it's meant to be a truth if it's in the textbook. When I was taking my first biology course, I was taught that there were 48 human chromosomes, not 46. Okay.
Wow.
Because that's what the textbook said.
Yeah.
But that was wrong, okay? So the arbitrary becomes essential. That was an essential truth until somebody corrected it, said, no, it's not 46, it's 48, it's 46, okay? Used to be the thought that there were 9 planets, including Pluto out there. Now the Pluto is no longer a planet, right? So it was arbitrarily assigned to be a planet. No, it isn't anymore. It's a different truth, okay?
Yeah.
So things that are arbitrary, things that just happen as a result of successive accidents, are recognized and ratified as if they were the truth. And we accept that as the way things are. There happen to be 50 states in the United States of America right now. Is that an essential truth? It is now.
Yeah.
But it hasn't always been, has it?
Yeah.
And a lot of those states came into the Union under very strange circumstances, starting in 1775, 76 with the colonies, 13 of them initially, and now they're 50 in number. And a whole series of accidents have occurred in order to form the map of the United States in the way it is. We accept it as now an essential entity that has a kind of a permanent existence, but it was formed arbitrarily.
Are you studying how the arbitrary becomes the essential? Are you just making a statement of,
I'm being descriptive.
okay,
I'm not making it, I'm just being descriptive of the way the world works, right? It turns out it's hugely important, extremely important, because if I, I remember there's a psychologist who was giving this lecture one time. He said, one time I was playing a game with my two little girls. We were sitting down for dinner, and I decided to call Ruth Ann and Ann Ruth. He just changed their names. And he passed the butter Ann, but it was Ruth he was talking to, right? And she thought initially it was a game that they were playing, okay? And but the psychologist kept playing this game, calling Ruth Ann and Ann Ruth, right? Pretty soon they got upset. Dad, are you playing a game? No, this is really the way things are. They said, no, it isn't. I'm Ann, and she's Ruth. And they got very upset about it and started crying, upset, right? Because my name is my name, and don't mess with my name. Okay?
yes,
Got it?
yeah,
So people take things seriously because they're laid down as essential truths. But the father was playing a game, and he didn't think the kids would take it that seriously, but they did. Okay? There's some things you don't mess with
yeah,
that have to do with your identity, right? You're going to insult my mother, my family? Those are essential truths about me. Don't mess with that.
okay. How does that apply to the social climate of America today, where, to a certain extent, that idea of almost like that story you said, where an essential truth
Yeah.
about a daughter is about
Right,
daughters have
right,
changed, right?
right.
And we're now seeing, from a
Well,
perspective of certain people, essential truths
right.
changing.
Well, take a concept like patriotism. When you say patriotism, you're loyal to the United States of America. We all take a pledge of allegiance and all that kind of thing, right? And I have no embarrassment about being loyal to the United States of America, even though it was formed arbitrarily, and even though the fact that I'm here, my parents are German. And yet I was brought up as a citizen of the United States of America, and I own that identity as part of who I am. So if people say something that is insulting or diminishing about the United States of America, I may take it personally, okay? You don't want to criticize something that a person takes seriously as an essential part of their identity, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that's going on now is that this guy, Donald Trump, is saying, make America great again. What he's saying is that there are large portions of people out there who don't feel that America is the country that it once was, and they're feeling bad about that, And so he wants to restore the greatness that once was America, but in doing so, he's running roughshod over my conception of America, and probably yours as well, and acting in a way that we regard as insulting and improper, right? So these things are embedded in our value systems, but you don't mess around with certain things. You don't criticize me or my identity in a way that's fundamentally flawed based upon your prejudices, whatever they might be, right? So this is a loaded topic.
Do you think that in general, from a social perspective, that psychology has a place in sort of like this new world where science is driving the ideas that push society forward, as opposed to things like religion or magical thinking, I guess?
Well, science is a guide to certain truths. There are certain questions, however, that you can ask that science doesn't have an answer to. What happens to us when we die? People have opinions about that, but they don't know.
Yeah.
Is there a God? Science has opinions about that, but we don't know the answers to those questions. Yet there are a lot of questions that you can ask that are not strictly speaking scientific questions. That doesn't keep them being from significant questions, because they are significant questions.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
So. I mean, can't take what does it mean to fall in love with somebody and to get married to them? In our society, it's illegal to have more than one wife or more than one husband. It's called bigamy. It's illegal and regarded as morally improper, right? But it isn't always so. There are tribes and societies in the world where bigamy is not regarded as wrong, but it is in ours. So these are arbitrary rules that are made up and carried forward, and they're very significant and very important. And you have to realize that, but you just can't wish it away. Science has a range of convenience for asking and answering questions, but not all the questions that you want to ask have scientific answers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we have to find truth in other ways. And people have beliefs that are not based on science, but are based upon tradition or based upon habit or what people told them. I mean, the whole idea of believing in the Bible. Forgive me if I, am crossing a boundary here, but when someone says, "Do you believe the Bible?" I said, that Bible was written by human beings. And so, do I believe it? Yeah, there it is. And it says holy on the cover. And I say, the only problem I have with the Bible is not the Bible itself, but it's the holy part. Because I don't know who made it holy. Okay. Because this is written by human beings.
Yeah.
We all know that.
Yeah.
Okay. But you don't want to admit that to be the case, that it wasn't blessed by God from on high. That is a convenient thing to think of as true. But you know what? It has yet to be demonstrated that that's how it actually happened, right?
Yeah.
We don't know that.
Yeah. You bring up a great point about culture, driving, for example, something like bigamy, right? Like it's one place it's legal, another place it isn't.
Right.
Do you think there's something inherent about culture? Do you think it's something that's being forced onto people and they're being socialized, or do you think?
Of course, you can't avoid acquiring a culture of some form or another, but the form of culture you acquire is an accident and a result of the group of people you happen to be associated with when that little baby is born in the crib. They say that baby, that there's a thing called description. That is to say, the little baby doesn't have a right to say, my name is Leroy, and I want to be an engineer. The little baby doesn't do that. The little baby sits there and waits for things to happen to it. It waits for its identity to get formed. But when it's old enough to get language and have a name and talk about itself, then it says, "Oh, you mean I'm Portuguese? No kidding." What a surprise, And so there are all kinds of things that are laid down as truths. But the child growing up is not aware and doesn't do this. It's done to the child in growing up. And by the time you reach, let's say, 8 or 12 years of age, something like that, you know who you are, you know what your language is, you know who your friends are, you know who your family is, you know what your religion is, you know what your race is. All that stuff is acquired along the way. Okay?
So religion, by that definition, is absolutely something that is also acquired, obviously, based on where you're born. Right?
Exactly, yeah. And you then also begin to have powers of discretion. You can say, I don't like the religion I was taught as a child. As a matter of fact, I don't like the gender I was given as a child. I think I'm going to change things.
Yeah.
Now, until recently, that hasn't been a big issue because not many people have made that declaration. But now we have quite a large number of people who are saying the LGBTQ thing, has to do with people questioning their sexual identity, their given gender, or their given performed sexual practices. They're not just taking it as it was given to them. They're going to try to make it different. And that is a very significant kind of change that is occurring, right?
What do you think is driving that? Do you think it's advances in technology? Do you think it's a rise in sort of like this consciousness in humanity?
It's a rise in consciousness is a good way of putting it. We used to talk about consciousness raising, You can be, forgive me for being personal here, but here, you're raised as an African American. You discovered that you had an ancestry that was born in Africa, somehow or other, and they were all slaves, when they came over from the United States, right? They didn't decide to be slaves; they just were slaves, and they were brought over here, and they didn't have any choice about the matter. They just were brought over here, But now that you're here, you have the right to disown slavery, and the nation has a right to disown slavery as a legitimate form of being, and we did that a lot of years ago, back in the Civil War. We got rid of slavery as a problem in the United States. But a lot of people still have the heritage of slavery that continues on, and that's very difficult to eradicate. Okay, so these things are deep and significant, and they're everlasting, and you just can't change them arbitrarily and have them stick, because people are going to question what you're accepting to be true and what you're accepting to be false.
So these things that are happening in society, you would say these things are almost like a natural evolution of just the social consciousness. People just sort of like waking up and saying,
Well,
hey,
exactly. That is to say, exactly. And that as consciousness is raised, for example, when I came to Wesleyan, there were no female students. There were no female faculty members. So there was consciousness raising of the form that said, women are not being given equal rights to men at the access for access to education, and Wesleyan University is an example of that denied access. So let's change that, okay? So long about 1970, they changed that. And now you can be a woman and be a Wesleyan student and be a woman and be a Wesleyan faculty member. Now half of the Wesleyan faculty members at least are women, and half of them at least are females, students. And so, but these things are changed because people changed, allowed the gatekeeping rules changed, okay? Who can come in and who cannot come in. But that is always a matter of a changing consensus about what's proper and what's legal and what's legitimate. And that's not given in the nature of things. That's something we make up and carry along with us, okay? And you can't tell how that's going to happen. We don't know what the future is going to bring in this regard. Are we going to continue to regard the conventions that we've inherited as in some ways sacred conventions? Or are we going to change them? Good question. I don't know the answer.
So the sacred conventions that have been carried forth and that we've sort of like lived in and existed in and has driven us and become essential to us.
Right.
It's not a fair statement to say that these are sacrosanct, right? Like these things.
No, they are to the extent that people generally regard them as sacrosanct. You know, if an object can be a holy object, but that is not inherent in the object. It's inherent in the consensus of the group of people around the object.
Okay.
It's not in the object. It's in the people's minds that are carrying. You cease to regard something as. I mean, I remember having a professor in graduate school who said, "Hey, you wouldn't spit on the cross, would you?" And what he meant by that was that there are certain things we regard as sacred in our world, not because they are, but because you believe they are. And so. And even though you may not be a Christian, you still probably wouldn't spit on a cross because you don't want to offend other people or you don't want to do something that is just awful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, these conventions are extremely strong and extremely stubborn, but they're not absolute. They can be changed.
Okay. I have children that are now, one is 19, one is 17. They're
Right.
moving into college, becoming adults.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And I always struggle with this idea of what I perceive the world to be and keeping things normal,
Right.
even though I'm not going to live in the world that they're going to
Right, exactly.
they're going to live in.
Exactly.
And it's sort of almost like the parent's dilemma, right? You
That's
sort of
right.
try to force this idea that
Right.
you grew up in.
Right.
But you're ultimately not going to cash those checks. You're not going to have
That's
to deal with
right.
the consequences.
That's right.
So what would be your advice for parents struggling with that dilemma?
Well, to be modest, to be humble, to be open, and to not be afraid about loving your children or loving other people or loving your life or loving, a lot of things. Because I think that's extremely important. Why should life be impoverished by people being told that they can't love things, right? So I think, this is personal. I think, first of all, do no harm. That admonition that applies to physicians, I think, applies to the rest of us as well. Don't harm people. Don't harm your children in particular. So you want to be caring about other people with whom you have contact, insofar as you can, right? Why not? It's good for everybody. So to carry that attitude and to, I was born a preacher's kid, and so I'm religious by accident in some because I happened to be born as a preacher's kid, right? But I think there are certain religious ideas that are good ideas, and when the prophet says, walk humbly with your God, I take that's a good idea. Walk humbly. with your God. Because don't be arrogant. Don't think you know it all, because you don't. And walk humbly, and don't hurt other people, and be kind, for sure. Love mercy. Right? That's another commandment I think we should honor. The range of experience that people bring to the table, of course, is different, and I think this is a wise thing to do. So good. I'm glad to hear you're doing that.
Yeah.
The arbitrary, you have that video already?
Yes, I have
So
the
you've
video,
actually
yes.
downloaded it,
Yes.
you've looked at it?
Yep.
Okay, so that was done as an assignment that was given to me by a group of psychologists that I'm associated with. And that was done about, 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. I wouldn't change it very much from what it says right now.
When I saw the video, it's almost like a switch flipped. It's like sometimes you understand things, but words haven't been put to it.
Right.
Is the best way to describe it. And when you hear the term, right, for something that you've observed, but has no name, so to speak, right? It kind of clicks, and you're like, okay.
How to categorize this thing.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, it's just a phrase. And here, recently I had the experience. I had the custom of sending out a Christmas letter every year. And I started to write a Christmas letter this year on the topic of why I am a Christian. Because I was born in the church, my dad was a minister and so on. And so I struggled with that, and I said, I can't write this essay. I can't tell you why I'm a Christian. I came to the conclusion finally that I am a Christian by accident. I didn't do this just as an act, but on the other hand, I do have some convictions, as it turns out. So I didn't write the Christmas letter I thought I was going to write. Instead, I wrote an essay called "In Praise of Tuesday," which is a kind of a neutral topic. But then I began to think about it more and say, well, you say you have convictions. What are they? And so I made a list of 7 items that I regard as convictions. Okay, that I have. And the next essay I write, I'm going to talk about these 7 convictions. One of them is that the arbitrary becomes essential. Another is a development of the idea that in the Latin phrases, mundus vult decipi, which the world wants to be deceived. Okay, what? The world wants to be deceived? Yeah, people love magic. Now you see it, now you don't. They love things that are just blazingly amazing, and is that the truth? I don't necessarily want the truth. The truth is kind of boring. How about some fantasy? How about some imagination? How about some magic in life?
Some conspiracy.
Lots of things that are imaginary. So one of the essential truths of life, I think, is that people have an interest in the unreal, in the imaginary, in the magical, and in some ways want to be deceived. If you watch little kids watching a magic show, they're looking at this thing and they're seeing the rabbit, and the rabbit was there, and the woman who's cut in half, and then you pick a card, any card, and the card appears on somebody's ear. Great stuff. And you're amused by that kind of thing and enjoy it. And yet we're being deceived, and that we're willingly deceived. That's the curious thing about this whole thing.
Yeah.
People want to be deceived, and yet they want to be undeceived at the same time. They want to be able to debunk things and to see the real truth behind the tricks that are being performed in front of their eyes. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So both sides of that thing are going on at the same time.
Are you religious? Are you a deist? Are you a theist? Are you?
Look, I am religious in the sense that I go to church and I say, because I love to sing, and I love the aesthetics of the worship service itself, and I love the whole pretension of being in touch with something almighty and all. And I just think that's outstanding. Is it all true? I wouldn't vouch for it. No. If my life depended on it, would I vouch that this is the absolute truth? No. But it's something that I'm into that form of theater, and I take it seriously, and I respect people's differences. I don't try to proselytize others. I have in my family missionaries. It's the last thing I want to be is a missionary. So I don't want to teach anybody, doctrine that is just an arbitrary
Yeah.
story that I happen to be believing. But on the other hand, I respect the religions of peoples, and I want people to respect mine as well, of course.
So do you think that that statement you made that the world wants to be deceived applies to the notion of
Of
religion?
course, of course, because to live as an atheist is a lean and barren existence, in my view. You know, it's not life is not nearly as interesting. No, it isn't. You know, I've recently written a piece on joys and sorrows. You know, and people say, "Oh, well, joys are good and sorrows are bad." Well, except when you realize that unless you have sorrows, you don't really have joys. And joys lead to sorrows, and sorrows lead
Lead
to
to
joys. So
joy.
there's a cyclical character to this thing. You like blues singing? People play
Yeah.
the blues singing. Me too. But there's something soulful about that, right? It's wonderful. And you see people talking and they're singing the blues and they're suffering, and it's beautiful, and you're crying. Requiem Mass by Verdi or by Mozart, and then, you know, powerful music, you know, powerful drama. Is it all true? I don't know, but it grabs me. You
Yeah.
know, and so there are things that we participate in trading joys and sorrows, and out of sorrows grow joys, and out of joys grow sorrows, and so it's not a question of just trying to maximize your joy and minimize your sorrow. You got to accept both, and you got to explore life in a way that accepts both.
A great man once said, free from desire, you realize the mystery caught in the desire, and you see only the manifestations. If indeed we are the puppets held by socio-normative strings like marionettes dancing along an arbitrary yet essential path, it calls to question how free will truly is. I have no doubt that the future holds answers to these trying questions, but for today, we can only wonder. Till next week, keep your thinking caps on.